Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. And the motion is this House would welcome the death of God. Now, on one reading, the wording of that motion would seem to imply that an atheist would have to assume that God exists, and a theist would have to assume that God could die. So I think neither of those are likely. So religions typically get out of those type of dilemmas by assuming that the word is metaphorical. So I think I'll take that approach today. So by welcoming the death of God, I mean welcoming the death of the idea of a God. Because the idea of a God corrupts our search for the truth. And because societies are healthier when there is the least belief in gods. So let's start with the idea of how the idea of gods corrupts our search for the truth. It does this by requiring us to use faith when we're trying to identify what's most likely to be true about reality. And by faith I mean believing something is true disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. And faith is the least reliable way of determining what's most likely to be true, because faith results in different people coming to different beliefs about the same reality. Whereas applying reason to evidence is a far more reliable way of identifying what's likely to be true, because it more reliably results in different people coming to the same beliefs about the same reality. And when we apply reason to evidence about the idea of gods, we notice three things. Firstly, the idea of God encourages us to believe implausible things about very big questions. Secondly, it corrupts our understanding of reality. And thirdly, it corrupts our understanding of morality. And I'll go over those three arguments briefly. Firstly, it encourages us to believe implausible answers to big questions. Now, we know in terms of the literalist idea of gods, as in sacred scriptures and so on, we know how implausible those are. They involve a God that's three people in one person, who impregnates a virgin human being on the planet Earth in order to give birth to himself. It involves Muhammad flying on a winged horse and splitting the moon in two, and it involves Joseph Smith talking to God through his hat and wearing magic underpants. Now, even Tony, I suspect, doesn't believe that that type of almost caricature God exists. So I'm assuming what we're talking about today is the more sophisticated idea of a God, which typically involves a more mysterious being that is typically a pure mind without a body, that is perfect and changeless, beyond time and space, all knowing, all good and all powerful. They seem to be the three the various attributes that are typically attributed to that type of a God. But a pure mind without a body is an invented convenience. Because we've no evidence that a mind can exist without a body, or without a brain, or without an energy source. And we've lots of evidence to suggest that it can't. And even if we explore this invented convenience, a pure mind without a body might be aware of the existence of matter, but wouldn't be able to do anything, because it wouldn't have any mechanism with which it could interact with that matter. If this pure mind is perfect, then it wouldn't create anything, because being perfect, it would have no need or desire to do anything. If it is changeless, then it can't create anything, because the mind would have to change in order to do so. If this mind is beyond time and space, then it can't cause anything to happen, because cause and effect involve time and space. And if the God is all-knowing, all-powerful and all-good, then it would have created a perfect universe. And at a minimum, a perfect universe would not contain suffering or evil. So those are the type of implausible beliefs that the idea of God encourages us to accept on faith. On top of that, it corrupts our understanding of reality when compared to the understanding of reality that we get through applying reason to evidence. Theists typically believe that this God created the universe with a purpose. But we don't see any purpose in the universe. We don't see the universe moving towards any purpose. Instead, we mostly see impersonal forces pushing and pulling particles around, and mostly moving towards a state of increasing disorder. Theists typically believe that this God has a special relationship with human beings on the planet Earth. But instead, what we see is a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each of which is 100 billion stars like our sun, incredibly wasteful for such an imagined purpose, even if it did exist. this God would have wasted almost all of 14 billion years of time and almost all of 100 billion galaxies of space for this supposed human-focused plan on planet Earth. Even on planet Earth, theists believe that this God created human life as more special than other forms of life. But we know that we're just one evolved species among many on this planet. There have been 5 billion species on this planet. 99% of them are now extinct. Humans are just one of the remaining 50 million species, and our survival is as precarious as any of those other species. But what we have done as a species is we have evolved the capacity to apply reason to evidence. And that enables us to understand more clearly how the universe functions on a natural basis, and to move ever closer to, in the words of this motion, to the death of the idea of a God. That astoundingly self-important belief that we humans, alone on our planet, alone in our solar system, alone in our galaxy, alone in the universe, are the only living beings that have been given this supposedly immortal soul by the creator of the universe. The third question, and possibly the most significant in terms of our behaviour, is the idea of a God corrupts our understanding of morality. Now, by morality, what I mean by morality is how we deal with other sentient beings. That an outcome is objectively bad if it harms another sentient being, and a behaviour is objectively wrong if the agent unjustly harms another sentient being. Now, if there was an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God that was the source of morality and that cared about human beings on the planet Earth, then at a minimum, at an absolute rock bottom minimum, we would expect that being to be able to convey the same moral messages to everybody in different places and different times. However, if there was no God, what we would expect to see is that different sets of people at different places around the world and at different times throughout history would evolve different codes of morality. And that is indeed what we do see. So in parallel to applying reason to the evidence of reality, in order to try to understand what's most likely to be objectively true about the nature of reality, we can apply reason to the evidence of our behaviour in order to try to understand what's most likely to be objectively true about morality. And it is simply false to suggest that you need to invoke gods in order to do that. There are many approaches to moral philosophy that don't invoke gods. And the one that I come closest to subscribing to myself as a variation on John Rawls' social contract theory of morality, which is essentially that if you hypothesize a group of perfectly rational people and you ask that set of perfectly rational people to design principles of justice for a society, but when doing so they don't know while they are coming up with those rules what role they will have within that society. They don't know whether they'll be rich or poor. They don't know whether they'll be male or female. They don't know whether they'll be sick or healthy. That provides them with a veil of ignorance that enables them to be impartial in developing as close as we can get to universally just principles. Now, I personally add an extra layer to Rawls' theory, which is I think they shouldn't know what species they are either, because I think one of the greatest moral crimes of all generations now is the way human beings have exploited non-human animals. So in any given circumstance, it's already hard enough to try to figure out, even with that, what the right thing to do is, because there's so many evolved attributes of morality in terms of empathy, compassion, cooperation, fairness, reciprocity, justice, and the interaction of different behaviours and multi-layered consequences. It's pretty hard at the best of times to figure out what the right thing to do is in a lot of circumstances. But what the idea of a God does is it corrupts that already difficult task by adding in imaginary, supposed supernatural commands that are unrelated to those, and makes it even more difficult. Not only is belief in God not needed for objective morality, but belief in a God can corrupt our rational search for objective morality. And all of this is supported in the fact that societies are healthier when there is less belief in God. The World's Values Survey shows how that happens. When people are focused on survival values, traditional religious values are stronger in society. As people move towards self-expression values, societies move away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. And the type of things that trigger that are investment in health, education, communications technology, moves towards democracy. Other studies show that secular and atheist people are on average less racist, less authoritarian, less dogmatic, less homophobic, less sectarian. And secular societies have lower rates of murders and abortions and teenage pregnancies and other social outcomes. And whatever way the cause and effect works there, the correlation is certainly welcome. So to conclude, we should welcome the death of the idea of a God. Because firstly, it's almost certainly false. Secondly, it corrupts our search for truth about reality and morality by requiring us to use faith instead of reason to try to answer big questions, and societies are healthier where there is less belief in God. So for those reasons, I'm happy to propose the motion. Thank you very much.